Joining me now to dissect some of today's big stories is my panel, Sky News contributor Campbell Newman and IPA's Director of Policy, Gideon Rosner. Gideon, I might kick off with you because I know the IPA have been quite critical in the last few days about sort of flattening the curve and the fact that we need to be looking more closely at lifting restrictions. The Prime Minister made it very clear in the last 24 hours that we've got another 4 weeks of the status quo. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, I think it's firstly good to see the Prime Minister and the government actually taking the IPA's advice or responding to the IPA's call for some information about its exit strategy. Now, the government is clearly contemplating its exit strategy. It is discussing it openly like it hasn't before. That wasn't the case a little while ago when we were told that this would go on for 6 months. But all we've got from the government in terms of what it's looking for are some vague aspirations about contract tracing and testing and all sorts of other things, which are great and admittedly important. But we don't know metrics, we don't know what success will look like, we don't know beyond at least 4 weeks exactly what it will look like once those restrictions come off. So I think the Prime Minister needs to do a little bit better at levelling with people and actually telling us what's going through his mind, because Gleeson, the idea that we will be under house arrest for another month is certainly despairing me, and I am leaving the house. I'm here right now in the Sky studio. There are people who are housebound who can't contemplate living for this way much longer, and people need hope.
Campbell, do you agree with the Prime Minister to hasten slowly?
Look, I think he's got to be very, very careful, but my sympathies probably lie more with the line that the IPA has been pushing and Gideon, because we do need a plan for coming out of this. There's no doubt that what the Prime Minister and the National Cabinet have done has been extremely successful. They have absolutely suppressed the progression of the virus through the Australian community, and as a consequence of that, there's been economic destruction. So it does behove all of them now to actually move towards lifting restrictions in a sensible, considered way, but lift them they must. And that wasn't part of the conversation, I think, until the IPA fairly forcefully in the last couple of weeks made that point. So good on the IPA.
Campbell, WHO, should we withdraw funding like the United States?
I actually think that we should be pushing for regime change there, with the penalty being that we will withdraw funding if it isn't achieved. Because I actually have a very good friend who lives in Geneva and who, for quite a long time, back I think as early as February, was telling me, at the beginning of February, was telling me there was a big problem, that people in Geneva believed there was a big problem, and they believed that the WHO was not telling it straight and was swallowing what was coming out of China. And it starts at the top, and there needs to be that change at the top to actually give confidence in this very important organisation going forward. So if they don't make some moves to do that, then absolutely, I'm with the Donald.
Gideon, Malcolm Turnbull's memoir, he hasn't missed anyone. In fact, he's even had a crack at Scott Morrison, basically accusing him of being an actor when it comes to this daggy dad sort of makeup that he comes up with. What do you think of Malcolm's attacks on most of his former colleagues and the fact that he's given away a number of private conversations? And of course, I didn't mention that he had a crack at Kevin Rudd as well.
Well, it's a bit rich for Malcolm Turnbull to say Scott Morrison's an actor. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull was an actor for the 14 years he was in Parliament calling himself a Liberal. I mean, that was not great acting, I might add, but it was an acting nonetheless. You know, Gleeson, my paternal grandmother, may she rest in peace, had a saying. She said, when you point the finger at somebody, there are 3 fingers pointing right back at you. And I think this book, on top of the way he left Parliament, on top of his destructive attitudes, since on top of everything else, vindicates people like myself and anybody else who worked with Malcolm Turnbull and knew what the real Malcolm was like. We know that he is petty, he is vindictive, he has no ideological compass. And the funny thing is, though, Gleeson, even the people he is aiming this at are not buying what he is selling. He is doing all of this so he can be feted by the ABC and Q&A and the Guardian and the same crew who liked Leather Jacket Malcolm, because he wants to be this great hero who tried to change the Liberal Party from the inside, tried to take on those evil climate deniers, tried to yank the Liberal Party into modernity and everything else, and got torn down by forces beyond his control. The left, much as I disagree with them, know as well as I and you do that Malcolm Turnbull is absolutely full of the proverbial. So look, he's just going to get more and more bitter and twisted. But I don't mind so much. It certainly vindicates people like myself who despaired, absolute despaired, on that terrible night in 2015 when 54 nincompoops in the coalition, in the Liberal Party party room, gave the keys to the Ferrari back to the kid who crashed it.
Campbell, would Malcolm Turnbull have beaten Bill Shorten?
No, he wouldn't. I don't think he would have at all. And there was a long descent into hell while he was the PM. And, the base of the Liberal Party were just dismayed by the things that he was doing or the things that he wasn't doing. So, look, just in terms of my reflections on what's been reported about what's in the book, I haven't read it, only what's been reported in the media. I think it's a great pity, because at the end of the day, the role models for being a former Prime Minister have got to be John Howard. He's the gold standard, and I've got to give some kudos to Julia Gillard as well for the way they've conducted themselves. And it's this ultimately is a reflection on Malcolm Turnbull, sadly, as Bob Catter said before.
Campbell, the left faction of the Labor Party here in Queensland have had their pants pulled down over these rental tenancy legislative reforms that are due to go before Parliament next Wednesday. They have heavily skewed them against landlords, 600,000 landlords in Queensland, 83% of the mum and dad investors who basically have got a unit as an investment. And they are filthy. They've written en masse to state Labor MPs, and there now seems as though there's some compromise in the air.
Well, look, Gleeson, this is a very important issue. And firstly, may I say that the problem here starts, unfortunately, with the Prime Minister and the National Cabinet, who started talking, particularly the PM, in a way that hurt landlords going back many weeks ago, because the language was all about vilification and denigration, and landlords are bad and tenants are sort of oppressed. And that is just a nonsense. And to hear our Prime Minister talking that way dismayed me, because what then has happened, unlike in other states who have adopted a reasoned and sensible approach, that'd be my observation. In Queensland, we've got a very left-wing government who already were pursuing a very left-wing agenda when it came to residential tenancies and the landlord's rights. And so they had already cooked up what they wanted to do, and the COVID-19 thing, frankly, Gleeson, was going to be a big smokescreen to do this. Thankfully, it's great to see the Real Estate Institute of Queensland mount a very effective campaign. Aided, I acknowledge David Crisafulli from the LNP, who really got on the front foot. It's good to see finally the LNP waking up and actually taking the fight to this government. I would predict, as you were alluding, that there would be some changes. There need to be substantial changes to the way the government has been talking about these things, and it needs to be fair and reasoned in these troubled times. So tenants do need to be protected, but landlords, should be given every right to challenge tenants when they make a case for financial hardship. They should have to document it, they should have to demonstrate, they should have to prove it beyond some sort of just assertion they've got difficulty. So I hope that's what we see next week out of the Queensland Parliament.
Gleeson, can I weigh in and confirm with what Campbell just said?
Go ahead.
Sorry, can I just add to what Campbell just said? He's right, and I can add from the People's Republic of Victoria that landlords, commercial landlords in particular, have absolutely been hung out to dry. This moratorium on rent is absolutely idiotic. It should never have been introduced, because anybody who has commercial real estate can tell you that no landlord anywhere ever wants to lose tenants. No landlord wants to have empty shop fronts. Every landlord would bend over backwards to keep tenants in shops anyway. All this has done is create an incentive basically for commercial tenants, even ones whose business has not been affected, to not pay rent. And it's one thing to say that, well, people like John Gandel of Chadstone Shopping Centre or whoever else can afford to be shock absorbers for this economic catastrophe. But there are a lot of mum and dad retail investors, like frankly my paternal grandparents who escaped the Holocaust, came out to Australia and skimped and saved so they could buy a string of shops on Auckland Street, St Kilda, here in Melbourne, who are seeing their savings disappear, who are staring down the barrel of bankruptcy, and who have been unduly hit harder than they needed to be because of the idiotic social engineering by, I'm sorry to say, the entire National Cabinet.
Yeah, including the Prime Minister,
also,
because I've got to say it. I mean, I'm not going to let him off the hook. The Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg, and the National Cabinet have actually said there are no rules. They might dress up in this code of conduct, but the language is such that there is an absolute revolt out there. And I'm in commercial property, but I'm also getting emails from people around Australia who are mum and dad landlords who are saying, you know, XYZ company, an ASX-listed company, $5 billion has written to them and said, we're not paying the rent for 6 months. Well, the person who did that is the Prime Minister. And the person and the people who aided and abetted that rule of the jungle, or law of the jungle approach, are the National Cabinet. I don't know how they put the genie back in the bottle, because what it means is it devalues property, and not only is it the mum and dad investors who might own a small commercial property, but it's also the fact that we all, through our super funds, are investors in property. And retirees across Australia have just been smashed in the share market. And this really weird approach that the PM's gone on with means that they're going to get it in terms of the funds who've invested in property as well, because it is coming and it's a real problem. It's a legal problem, it's an equity problem, and people who are in the property sector are saying that never in their lifetime have they seen such an assault on private property rights by a supposed coalition government who believe in sort of aspiration, who believe in hard work, who believe in property rights, who believe in people getting ahead, and they're doing it to the nation. So I'm glad Gideon has raised it.
All right.